Okay, now that is a magic trick. One book, two movies. Nicely done. And as I continue on my revisit of the Harry Potter films, we have arrived at Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1. Because, yeah, this film kind of started a little bit of a mini trend for a little while of book adaptations being split into multiple films as opposed to being adapted as only one film. It seems to finally be done. I think with the end of Hunger Games, I feel like that was kind of it. But yeah, for a while there was this, The Last Twilight, Hunger Games, which I mentioned, The Hobbit. Oh my God. They managed to milk 3 out of that one. And it's not a trend I'm a fan of. That said, I do actually kind of defend it in this instance. And I'll get to the movie proper in a minute, but I kind of want to address the splitting first, since I am going to be reviewing each film individually, and if I don't talk about it here, where the heck else am I going to mention it? So the reason I kind of defend it in this particular instance is that I personally am of the opinion that there is the least you can get away with cutting from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the book. Now, you might look at some of the earlier books, just as thick or thicker than that one, and go, they trimmed stuff out of that. What's so special about this one? Well, it has to do with the structure and the narrative and what is actually taking up the time. Because if you look at what was cut out of all the other movies, it was subplots. It was classroom scenes. It was Quidditch. It was stuff that this book doesn't have. For as long as it is, Deathly Hallows is actually pretty tight as far as sticking to its plot. It doesn't diverge very much, and pretty much everything in there is relevant and pretty important. Like, they condense down some of the camping a little bit, but for the most part, there isn't a lot that you can just excise completely. You can't just remove entire characters or entire scenes or entire subplots and still have the story remain intact at its heart the way that you could with the other films. And one could make the argument that given the size of the franchise by this point, and this being the last one, they could have gotten away with basically pulling a Avengers Endgame and making a 3-hour plus movie, and maybe they could have pulled that off, but, you know, that's not what they opted for. They made 2-hour plus movies. And, again, I'm not going to say that it would have been just as good as a single film at 3.5 hours. That might have even been better. I'm not going to say it wouldn't be, but I don't begrudge the decision to split in this case, just because I don't think they had the room to cut as much with this story. I just don't think they did. Now, that said, I do understand also there was a returns box office motivation to do it. So while I just defended it from an artistic and adaptation standpoint, I do understand that was not the only reason they decided to do that. Probably wasn't even the primary reason. I'm just saying that because of that, I'm more okay with it than some other folks I have seen. Okay? Okay. So let's talk about the thing itself. This is obviously a pretty big divergence from the other films, just as the book was a pretty big divergence from the other books. We are not at the school anymore. We are completely broken free of the structure of the school year, which is how every other book and film has been built. A little bit more so the books because, again, because of all the subplots and classroom time that had to be trimmed to in order for the movies to be a reasonable runtime, the films weren't quite as rigidly structured around the school year as the books were, but they still were all set at Hogwarts and all worked within that same framework. This is untethered. This is doing its own thing pretty much from the get-go. And some things I think even doing a little bit better. So, for instance, well, let's start talking about characters' death. Because the thing opens with more than a few of those. So, like, spoilers, like, I shouldn't have to say that. Not for a revisit review. Anyways, so, like, Hedwig, I think her death hit me a lot harder in this than it did in the book. In the book, Hedwig dying was not dissimilar to Sirius Black dying. It just kind of happened, and I wasn't even, like, I was sad, but I was like, that was so quick, I didn't even know what to make of it. And there's also Mad-Eye Moody dying, which we don't actually see happen. We don't see happen in the book either, I don't think. It's been a long time since I've read the books. Like, give me a slight break on that. But there's always been a problem for me on that. And actually, it's been a problem. I should have mentioned this in not Prisoner of Azkaban, in Order of the Phoenix, because it actually came up there for me as well, which is anytime Mad-Eye Moody has reappeared post-Goblet of Fire, I don't know what to make of him. And more specifically, in regards to the fact that he dies in this story, I'm not impacted by that the way I'm pretty sure Rowling and the filmmakers want me to be. For one very simple reason. I don't know Mad-Eye Moody. And the thing is, the films and also the books can trick you into thinking you know Mad-Eye Moody. But you need to remember, the character we spent all this time with in Goblet of Fire, that wasn't him. That was someone pretending to be him. And even if we make the leap that it was a 100% accurate depiction and faking of Mad-Eye Moody, i.e., aside from the setting up the stuff for Voldemort, literally everything that Barty Crouch Jr. pretending to be Mad-Eye Moody did was exactly what Mad-Eye Moody himself would do, which, honestly, that's a big leap. But even if we make that leap, he still never really built a relationship with Harry. Not himself. A fake version of him did. He himself didn't have that time. He himself was never Harry's teacher. And I'm not saying that means you can't bring the character back. It just means that I've never forgotten the fact that I don't actually know him. The films try and trick you into thinking you do, but you don't. Not really. And I've always been acutely aware of that. So his death, and both in the book and in the film, just never hit me the way that it was supposed to. Also, this story, I remember watching it because I watched it. I was gonna say I watched it with Liz. I watched it with Liz in the room. She was working on work stuff, and she asked me to put on something that she could basically semi-ignore. And I opted for this because I had to watch it anyways. And of course, she'd seen it before. So we noted like the marriage of Bill and Fleur Delacour. That is... Anyone else feel like that's really weird? Like, really weird. Because when did they ever meet? Because Bill was done with Hogwarts. I mean, heck, before the book series even started, saying nothing of Goblet of Fire. When did they meet? What monstrous coincidence that this character who we knew from one time before just so happened at some point, somewhere in her life, to meet and fall in love with this person who, at least in the films, we actually haven't seen before this either, but who has these connections to all these people we already know, just so she can show up back into the story. It's really weird. It's really contrived. You know what else is really contrived? Tonks and Lupin. No. At this point, like, I know some people say it to be cheeky, but, like, honestly, I buy it a lot better than I buy the romance. Just the idea that they are each other's beard. And if you don't know that terminology, given that both characters are actually, to varying degrees, kind of queer-coded, within the LGBTQ plus community, a beard is what you call the fake straight relationship a queer person has to cover the fact that they are queer. And, like, I buy that a lot more than I buy their relationship. Aside from the fact, like, the age gap is a little creepy. Like, that... Bleh. And also, Tonks, I didn't mention this in Order of the Phoenix. Tonks kind of gets the short shrift throughout this film series, which is a shame, because I really liked her in the books. It's a little irritating. That's a little weird and annoying. But... having said all that, the performances are still really, really good across the board. They remain so. Especially between the core three of Ron, Hermione, and Harry. And I know some people, especially people who really have a strong preference for book Ron over movie Ron, have some real issues with some of the stuff that goes on with him. At this point, I've come to embrace movie Ron as being a slightly different entity, and I think Rupert Grint delivers on the performance for the version of Ron that he has been portraying up to this point. If that still doesn't work for you, cool. I'm not saying you have to swallow it. I'm just saying it works for me. There's a great deal of tension in the entire film. It does a really good job of making the danger feel ever present at every turn, no matter what they're doing, no matter if they are in the woods, infiltrating the Ministry of Magic, in Godric's Hollow, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, it feels dangerous at all times, which it should. The other thing that I wanted to mention, though, visually and also audio-wise, I put this out in a tweet in case I forgot to mention it. The volume discrepancy on this thing between the action scenes and the dialogue scenes, man, that was irritating. I don't know if it's like that because like it's optimized for surround sound, which I don't have, and that's what's throwing it off. I don't know, but I had to have my remote control right next to me because I had to turn the volume down every single time an action scene started because it just was so loud. And then as soon as it ended, I had to turn the volume back up again because the dialogue scenes are so much quieter. That disparity, really irritating. And then visually, I feel like the previous film, I feel like Half-Blood Prince did a pretty good job of having a sense of darkness while still being more or less visually coherent. This one, especially in some of the outdoor scenes, in some of the stuff in the woods at night and darker scenes and whatnot, I think they were trying to go for a natural lighting thing. The thing is, natural lighting at night, you can't see. And guess what? There are swaths of this film you can't see what is going on. It's really frustrating, especially because, again, at least to me, the previous film did a really good balance from the visual standpoint, and yet this one is so drenched in black. Again, I know you're trying to go for like the dark visuals because it's a darker story, but like this is too much. As a film, taking completely unto itself, even though I did kind of defend the decision to split the stories, and I do think the point at which they decided to put the split was the place where it makes sense to put it. I think Dobby's death and Voldemort getting the wand is a place that makes a lot of sense. You get a cliffhanger into it, and you have a ending and a loss that will invigorate the heroes going into the next film. So it was well chosen as far as that goes. But because that is not meant to be the end of this story, as originally written, it does have a weird sort of flow and structure. It doesn't have a standard 3-act structure, which does not necessarily damn a film. Not everything has to have a 3-act structure. But given that the previous films had fairly rigid structure in terms of how they progressed and the pace at which they did it, to have a film later in that same series mess with and break and reshuffle that structure so much, which again, it had to, since it's not actually telling a complete story in one go. It does make it feel a little bit odd, because even by the metric of its own series, it feels weird. The flow is strange. I'm not necessarily sure there was a way around that if you accept the decision to split this into two halves, but I feel like I would have been remiss to not mention it. I don't really have a ton to say, apart from just praising the acting and especially the trio. I mean, all the other actors are good as well. No one else really gets a highlight to the same degree. I really liked the animated segment describing the Deathly Hallows and their origin. I really liked the visual styling, the sort of puppetry, sort of looking, marionette almost looking aspect to it. I quite enjoyed that. I really liked that visual presentation of it. And yeah, I think it's a solid build up to the next one. Although I suspect when I rank these at the end of this exercise, this is going to be more towards the bottom, because while it serves the purpose it needs to, which is to set us up for a big blowout finish with the eighth film, actually taken as a thing unto itself, that there's a lot of stumbling points in it. I still enjoy it, but yeah, it's a bit of an awkward beast, this one. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. You seen it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's a bunch of stuff to do down there as well. You can like and subscribe. That helps me out quite a bit. There's a Patreon down there if you want to help me keep this thing going. That helps me out even more. There's links to other stuff besides. Click on things. They'll take you places, or don't. You don't have to, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned.